2025 did not resemble an ordinary year. It unfolded like a chapter torn from ancient prophecy, one headline after another echoing warnings recorded centuries ago. Every region felt the tremors. Russia advanced. Israel fought on multiple borders. Sudan burned. Myanmar and Thailand saw upheaval. Venezuela fractured. Nearly every continent flared with conflict. And hanging over all of it the threat of nuclear escalation, whispered like a storm building offshore. Long before today, Jesus described a world like this: wars, rumors of wars, one nation challenging another. His words sound less like distant scripture and more like current events. What unsettled the world even further was the global shift against Israel. A ground invasion into Lebanon. Missile exchanges with Iran and Yemen. Military standoffs with Syria. 5 battlefronts. One focal point, Jerusalem. Zechariah's ancient warning suddenly feels relevant. Jerusalem will become a cup that makes the nation stagger. The world will gather against her. And then September 2025 came. Israel entered Gaza by land, the old Philistine territory on the Mediterranean coastline. Zephaniah spoke of that land going to Judah's remnant over 2 millennia ago. One more prophecy seeming to align with modern action. So in a single year, we witnessed what many see as the echoes of 3 prophecies resurfacing all at once. But the story doesn't close here. Because 2025 didn't cool the global temperature. It raised it. China eyes Taiwan with calculated patience. Japan and the Philippines brace along the Pacific. India and Pakistan once again hover near a breaking point. Jesus never claimed these signs were the finale. He named them the start of labor, the first contractions before the world changes irreversibly. If that's the case, then 2025 was not a conclusion. It was the opening act. A foreshadowing of what 2026 may hold, if the patterns continue and prophecy keeps aligning with reality. Today, we step into that next chapter and consider what the scriptures describe might be on the horizon. Number 10, Zechariah 12, June 2025. The moment that many analysts warned about finally arrives. Israel unleashes a coordinated military campaign across 3 fronts: Iran, Gaza, and Lebanon, striking hard and without hesitation. This time, the world doesn't stand back and observe. It reacts like a row of dominoes. Turkey denounces the operation. Iran begins mobilizing forces. The UN calls for emergency inquiries and resolutions. And then the streets ignite. Crowds pour into London, Paris, New York, voices rising, demanding sanctions, demanding intervention. What was once a localized war has evolved into something else entirely, a confrontation between one nation and the global stage. Centuries-old scripture seems to echo through the headlines. Jerusalem, a cup that leaves surrounding nations staggering. All peoples gathered against her, those who try to move her, broken. A metaphor, a cup so potent it unbalances anyone who touches it. A warning, those who attempt to force Israel's hand will be wounded in the process. For many, that imagery feels like Israel's reality in 2025. Earlier that year, March 2025, Israel begins Operation Power and soared against Hamas, shattering a fragile ceasefire that barely lived through the month. On the night of March 18th, airstrikes light the sky over Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. Within days, civilian casualties climbed past 400, lives lost among women and children. Ground forces cut through the Netzarim corridor, splitting Gaza in 2. Neighborhoods become rubble. Hospitals fail under the strain. Then October arrives, with a brief breath of hope. On the 10th, the United States brokers another ceasefire. Troops withdraw. Aid trucks finally roll across the border. For 9 days, the world dares to believe the worst has paused, but the respite is short-lived. October 19th, Hamas strikes at Rafah. 2 Israeli soldiers fall, a 26-year-old major, a 21-year-old sergeant. Israel answers immediately. Airstrikes hammer the region. Casualties rise, 44 in a single day, 97 since the start of October, 230 wounded. The border closes again. Supplies are cut off. Accusations fly in both directions. Hamas insisting innocence, Israel claiming betrayal. Prime Minister Netanyahu orders a decisive counteraction. This time, the battlefield isn't the only front. The response spreads to conference halls and parliaments. UN resolutions, condemnations, Tens of thousands marching in Western capitals. The pressure is no longer military alone. It's diplomatic, it's economic, it's informational. A modern siege, not built from walls and soldiers, but from media narratives, political leverage, and global public opinion. 2025 marks the beginning of nations aligning against Israel. If this is the opening phase, then 2026 could be the tightening of the noose, the full siege some believe prophecy foreshadows. And beyond that, Scripture hints at a future intervention not shaped by governments, armies, or alliances, a turning point that no nation will be able to prevent. Number 9, Matthew 24. October 13, 2025. A date historians may one day circle in red ink. Because on that day, the world teetered on the edge of an unthinkable ending, held back by nothing more than a threat and silence. Dmitry Medvedev, Putin's closest political ally, delivered a message that electrified global media and rattled Western leaders. If the United States supplies Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, we will not confirm whether we believe them to be nuclear or conventional. Our response will match the threat. In other words, one misunderstood launch could trigger nuclear fire. Hours later, Vladimir Putin refused Donald Trump's proposed peace plan and escalated instead, ordering the deployment of arsenic missiles to Belarus, prepped for launch before the new year. The message was clear: Russia was positioning its hand over the launch button. Then came the onslaught. Within a single week of October, Russia unleashed devastation across Ukraine. 84 targeted airstrikes. 193 precision-guided bombs. Over 6,300 Shahid drones flooding the skies. Kiev and Kharkiv glowed with flames through the night. Neighborhoods collapsed. Electricity grids failed, 12,000 homes swallowed by darkness. Families were buried where they slept, the rubble becoming their tomb. The human cost? Almost unbearable. 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers dead. 380,000 wounded. 10,000 tanks reduced to scrap. Numbers that barely capture the suffering. But listen, this is why so many see something prophetic in all of this. It isn't only the war. It's the climate around the war, the pressure, the constant fear, the knife-edge tension. Jesus described a world like this with unsettling clarity. You will hear of wars, and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Many read that phrase, rumors of wars, and realize it perfectly mirrors our moment. Not the fighting itself, but the threat of what could erupt next. The missiles in Belarus. The nuclear insinuations. The political standoffs that feel like matches hovering over dry wood. A world afraid of what might happen at any second. This unease doesn't stop with Russia and Ukraine. It stretches across oceans. China's shadow looms over Taiwan. The Pacific trembles with military drills and warnings. Diplomats practice responses to scenarios they pray never come. If 2025 dragged us to the cliff's edge, then 2026 looks like the year someone might finally step forward and take the world with them. The next chapter could be the moment where prophecy and history become the same thing. Number 8, Ezekiel 38. July 2025 felt less like news and more like a scene pulled from prophecy, technology, and ancient scripture colliding on the battlefield. It all ignited on July 28th. From Israel's northern border, Hezbollah unleashed a violent storm of rockets toward Kiryat Shmona. The world paused. Within hours, Israel answered, not with traditional firepower, but with next-generation warfare. For 5 days, the conflict unfolded like something no military historian had ever recorded. Autonomous weapon systems swept through enemy territory, acting on artificial intelligence with terrifying precision. Neighborhoods suspected of hiding artillery vanished. Underground tunnels, spanning up to 10 kilometers, collapsed like paper tubes. These were the lifelines where rockets were stored, moved, and launched. Hezbollah retaliated with waves of explosive drones, assembled with Iranian engineering and guidance. The result? A nightmare. Beirut plunged into darkness. 200,000 civilians fled. Government structures buckled under the pressure. This wasn't just a border skirmish. It felt like the opening act of a new kind of war. But two details stand out, and they matter. The attack originated from the north. It was reinforced by Iranian technology. Those 2 points connect directly to a prophecy written nearly 2,600 years ago. Ezekiel records God's words. Set your face against Gog. I am against you. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, the house of Togarmah from the far north with all its troops. The text offers remarkable geographic clarity. Far north, the regions above Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, the historic domain linked to Togarmah. Persia, the ancient name for modern Iran, the same nation arming Hezbollah today. So when Israeli intelligence identifies Iranian-built drones striking from Lebanese territory, many see it not as coincidence, but as the skeletal outline of the Gog and Magog alliance taking shape. What happened in 2025 wasn't merely geopolitical. It looked like an ancient blueprint unfolding, piece by piece, in real time. The alliances are aligning. The tensions are intensifying. And if this trajectory holds, 2026 might not just be another year, it could be the moment when the sparks finally ignite into a conflict the prophets foresaw long before our world even existed. Number 7, Revelation 8. January 2025 opened with a scene Los Angeles had never witnessed before. Firefighters described intersections where vehicles liquefied in place, metal softening and sliding like molten wax. On January 7th, fierce Santa Ana winds, gusting beyond 60 miles per hour, turned 3 separate blazes, the Palisades, Eaton, and Sunset fires, into a single nightmare. This was not a normal wildfire. The heat became so intense it generated its own atmosphere, violent, towering flame vortices soaring nearly 100 feet high. By the time the flames exhausted themselves, the cost was staggering. 150,000 acres scorched. 18,000 structures gone. 500,000 residents evacuated from Malibu and surrounding areas. $53 billion in damage, marking the most expensive natural disaster of 2025. Yet the statistics weren't what haunted people. It was the sky. At night, the horizon glowed a dark crimson, smoke, embers, and reflection twisting the skyline into something resembling blood-red clouds, while ash fell continuously like a snowfall of soot. The air crackled with dry lightning, igniting new fires faster than they could be contained. From a secular standpoint, the event was catastrophic, an environmental and humanitarian disaster. But through a prophetic lens, some saw something else. Revelation 8 describes the first trumpet. Hail and fire mixed with blood were thrown upon the earth, a third of the land was burned up. To those who believe prophecy is unfolding, the parallels felt unnerving. Fire descending from above. A blood-colored sky. Lightning like hail made of flame. Land consumed on an unprecedented scale. The question that unsettled many wasn't just what happened, but where it happened. Why Los Angeles? For decades, critics have accused the city of exporting content they view as morally destructive, violence packaged as entertainment, occult themes woven into media, pornography normalized as industry. And in 2025, when California passed laws permitting abortion up to the moment before birth, some faith communities believed there was a final line crossed. They interpreted it as a moment of spiritual consequence. From that point of view, the fires were not random, they were a warning. Of course, others argue it was climate pressure, policy failure, and drought, nothing supernatural. But for those who see prophecy in motion, January 2025 was not just disaster, it was the first trumpet sounding. And if that trumpet has indeed echoed, they fear what the second and third could bring, possibly as soon as 2026. Number 6, Isaiah 17. Damascus holds a title few cities can claim. The world's oldest continuously inhabited metropolis. Over 11 millennia, it has endured the rise and collapse of empires, invasions, plagues, and natural disasters. Yet the Bible speaks of a day when even this ancient survivor will meet its end. Damascus will no longer be a city, it will become a heap of ruins. Isaiah 17 verse 1. For centuries, that sounded impossible. But the last few years have changed the conversation. After Bashar al-Assad's fall in 2024 and the rise of the extremist leader Ahmed al-Shara, Syria entered a new era of volatility, more unstable than anything seen since the civil war began. Tensions ignited on July 11, 2025, when Druze and Bedouin factions clashed near the southern border. 4 days. 250 dead. A brutal forecast of what was coming. But July 16th became the date analysts now call the breaking point. Israel, no longer content with issuing diplomatic warnings, initiated a direct strike on Damascus itself. Missiles hit the Ministry of Defense and detonated close to the presidential palace, not in suburbs, not at military installations outside the city, but in the core of governmental authority. This was unprecedented. An Israeli official summarized the shift in a chilling sentence. The era of warnings is over. Israel has struck Syrian territory before, often claiming protection of the Druze minority as the justification. But this time, the implications ran deeper. More strikes were threatened if Damascus failed to control the militias operating near Israel's border. And now, the city faces pressure from both directions. Internal collapse, leadership instability, militia infighting, and a fractured security landscape. External force, precision firepower capable of leveling government infrastructure. The United Nations condemned the attack as a reckless escalation, but even those diplomatic statements seem to ring hollow against the reality on the ground. This may not be the prophecy's ultimate fulfillment yet, but it carries the weight of a preview, a rehearsal. An ancient city long believed to be indestructible now appears one decisive strike away from matching the words Isaiah recorded thousands of years ago. A skyline reduced to rubble. A capital rendered uninhabitable. A city erased not by time, but by fire. For the first time, Damascus stands genuinely, visibly, precariously at the edge of the prophecy. Whatever happens next will determine whether Isaiah 17 remains a warning, or becomes tomorrow's headline. Number 5, Revelation 6. In 2025, footage coming out of Sudan felt almost unreal, like images from another era. Families stripping leaves from trees for sustenance. Children chewing grass because there is no other food. Whole communities running on nothing but hope. Sudan's civil war has dragged on for years, and each month seems to carve the country deeper into despair. The Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces are locked in a fight that has shattered the nation. Khartoum, Omdurman, and Sinnar, once bustling, now resemble skeletal remains of cities. Hospitals have collapsed, including Sinnar's central medical facility. Thousands are left without even the possibility of care. The scale of suffering is overwhelming. 150,000 plus civilians killed. 10 million forced from their homes. 25 million relying on aid rations to make it through the week. Children are dying not from violence, but from hunger, slowly and silently. The United Nations calls it the worst humanitarian emergency on Earth. But there is one detail that, for many, felt like it leapt straight out of ancient text. In Khartoum, the price of wheat has risen 300%. A single loaf of bread can now cost an entire day's earnings. 1 day of labor for 1 day of survival. That language echoes something written nearly 2,000 years ago. In Revelation 6, John describes the third horseman. I looked, and behold, a black horse, and the one who rode it held a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice. A quart of wheat for a day's wages. The scales are not courtroom imagery, they represent rationing, scarcity, measurement by desperation. A day's wage for the bare minimum needed to live. For those who interpret global events through prophecy, Sudan feels like more than tragedy. It looks like a shadow of the black horse, the symbol of famine, moving across our world. Not proof. Not fulfillment. But an unnerving reflection. And this raises a difficult question. If what is happening in Sudan resembles the conditions described for the black horse, how close might we be to the rest of the riders? The white horse of deception. The red horse of conflict and bloodshed. The pale horse of death. Even those who are not prophetic watchers admit, the world feels like it's shifting into a new season. A dangerous one. No one knows for certain what comes next. But what's unfolding in Sudan may be a signpost, a warning, of just how vulnerable the world has become. Number 4, 2 Timothy 3. Early in 2025, a clip from Myanmar swept across social media and shattered people's nerves. It showed soldiers in a crowded market, firing into groups of unarmed civilians. They weren't confused, panicked, or acting in self-defense. They were laughing, mocking, killing as though it were a source of amusement. Myanmar's tragedy has moved beyond the category of civil war. It has become something far more disturbing, a breakdown of sanity on a national scale. The ruling military junta, now clinging to only a fraction of the country, has unleashed a campaign of sheer terror. The United Nations reports more than 1,000 aerial bombings. Schools and hospitals are being reduced to ash by incendiary munitions. Over 3 million civilians are scattered through the jungle, hiding without food, shelter, or safety. And the brutality reaches further than the battlefield. Interrogation centers operating like medieval torture chambers. Sexual violence deployed strategically to break communities. Children publicly executed as warnings. Buddhist temples desecrated and converted into war posts. These aren't casualties of war, they are displays of moral collapse. Trying to analyze this with politics alone is like trying to diagnose an earthquake by studying architecture. Something deeper is rupturing. Scripture names it with unsettling precision. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Timothy 3 that in the final days, humanity would descend into peril. People will be lovers of self, fierce, without natural affection, haters of what is good. The phrase "without natural affection" is the key. It means the disappearance of basic human empathy, the innate impulse to shield the vulnerable, to care, to grieve for another person's suffering. When soldiers celebrate slaughter, when the suffering of a child carries less weight than the thrill of power, we are witnessing exactly what Paul warned about. It's not just conflict, it's a spiritual diagnosis. Myanmar in 2025 showed us what the death of empathy looks like. And if that's the threshold, then 2026 may be the year we step even deeper into the shadows Paul foresaw. Number 3, Joel 2. As if the atrocities in Myanmar hadn't already pushed the limits of human horror, March 28, 2025 delivered a new kind of terror, one that didn't come from armies or governments, but from the ground beneath their feet. At 9:43 a.m., while gunfire and airstrikes were already tearing the nation apart, the earth itself rebelled. A 7.7 magnitude earthquake erupted near Mandalay, the kind of quake that doesn't just shake buildings, it erases them. Streets ruptured like torn seams. Historic landmarks that had stood for centuries folded in seconds. By noon, the scale of the disaster was brutally clear. 45,500 lives lost, 30,000 homes obliterated, $12 billion in destruction. But those were only the opening notes of the catastrophe. When the infrastructure gave way, gas lines burst and power grids snapped, turning neighborhoods into instant infernos. Entire districts, constructed mostly of ancient timber, became fuel. The central market of Mandalay burned like a funeral pyre. Flames leapt high enough to claw at the sky. For days, vast pillars of black smoke towered over the city. They rose so thick, so dense, that sunlight vanished. Under war and now under ash, Myanmar was plunged into a literal twilight. This is where something eerie happens. The devastation no longer reads like headlines, it reads like scripture. The prophet Joel wrote of a day when God would display signs that no one could ignore. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. Joel 2 verse 30. 3 signs. 3 warnings. And Myanmar, in one awful moment, experienced them all. Blood, the countless victims of the quake, fire, infernos devouring homes and markets, columns of smoke, the blackened skies blotting out the sun. People caught between civil war and natural catastrophe had no way of knowing that they were mirroring a prophecy, line for line. They were simply trying to survive. But from the outside, it looked like a page of Joel had been torn from the Bible and laid over a map of Myanmar. In 2025, Myanmar became a crossroads where war met earthquake, where prophecy met reality, and where the world glimpsed a clock ticking down. If Joel's warning echoed in those columns of smoke, then 2026 may be the year that echo becomes a roar. Number 2, Luke 21. March 12, 2025, a date Australia will never erase. What began as a normal morning on the East Coast ended in scenes that felt ripped from prophecy. Paradise didn't fade, it collapsed. Cyclone Alfred, a Category 4 powerhouse, roared in from the Coral Sea. But it wasn't just wind. It came carrying the ocean itself. A storm surge nearly 26 feet high slammed into the shoreline like a liquid wall. Townsville vanished beneath it. In less than a day, neighborhoods that once held cafes and playgrounds were submerged under 10 feet of seawater, as if the coastline simply sank. Farther south, the devastation compounded. The Hawkesbury River in Sydney rose 43 feet, swallowing bridges, sweeping away cattle, vehicles, and entire houses as if they were twigs. It became the worst flooding scene in half a century. But there was one moment, one detail, that pushed the disaster into the realm of nightmare. In Cairns, the waters rose so violently that saltwater predators, crocodiles, were forced from their mangroves and into suburbia. Residents filmed them gliding through flooded streets, their eyes barely above the current, drifting between mailboxes and front doors. Nature wasn't just out of balance, it was invading. Australia, one of the world's wealthiest and most resilient nations, was brought to its knees. A national emergency was declared. The government publicly begged for aid from New Zealand and the United States. It wasn't just a disaster. It was a humbling. A reminder of how small humanity is when the earth decides to rise up. Survivors shared one detail again and again. The sound. They didn't describe waves crashing. They described thunder. A sound that didn't end. A roar that seemed to shake the air itself. That word, roar, is the exact word Jesus used when he warned of the final age. There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth, nations in anguish, perplexed by the roaring of the sea and the waves. Luke 21 verse 25. 2 parts. Both on display. The sea and the waves roaring. Witnesses said the ocean didn't crash. It roared, consuming cities as if obeying ancient instruction, nations in anguish, confused. A first world government frozen, overwhelmed, unable to comprehend the scale of what was happening. Cyclone Alfred was not merely a meteorological event. It felt like scripture in motion, prophecy shifting from ink to reality. If just one coastline roared in 2025, what happens when the seas awaken on multiple shores in 2026? Number 1, Revelation 16. May 22, 2025, a date that set global tension soaring. In the South China Sea, the crunch of metal on metal wasn't a navigation mishap. A Chinese vessel had deliberately rammed a Filipino boat near Sandy Cay Reef. But this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a reaction, a response to Operation Balakatan, the massive joint military exercises conducted by the United States and the Philippines between April and May. Over 14,000 troops, anti-ship missiles, and coordinated patrols with Japan and Australia had made waves across the region. For military strategists, it was a contest for maritime control. For students of prophecy, it looked like preparation for Armageddon. The Bible speaks in striking imagery. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Revelation 16 verse 12. In ancient times, the Euphrates was a barrier holding back armies from the east. Today, that barrier is the strategic waterways of the South China Sea and Pacific routes dominated by Western powers. By asserting control, China is drying up the river, clearing a path for what many see as the march of the kings of the East. The clashes and exercises of 2025 were not minor skirmishes, they were prophecy in motion. China is positioning itself, securing critical routes, and preparing for a future conflict that may erupt in 2026. And why 2026? Some scholars point to what they call God's timeline. Peter wrote, With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day. If we map history this way, the 6,000-year span of humanity is nearly complete, the sixth day is ending, the seventh millennium is about to dawn. Every biblical timeline suggests this era is now upon us, and the final countdown may reach its climax between 2025 and 2030. One more critical piece, the modern prophetic axis. China, Russia, and Iran are no random coalition. Political analysts worry, but Scripture predicted an Eastern alliance centuries ago. Ezekiel spoke of powers from the north, Revelation spoke of the kings of the east. Many experts believe that 2026 could be the year this alliance enters open conflict, fulfilling prophecy before our eyes. The pieces are aligning, the paths are being cleared, and the countdown is unmistakable. If you want to understand exactly what the Bible predicts about this alliance, which nations are named, and what the next moves could be, click the video on your screen. This is a revelation you won't want to miss.